Hi everyone, my name's Amelia and today we will be talking about the timeline of copyright. To start off, the Statute of Queen Anne grants owners monopoly for the 14 years after publication. For the first time ever, there was recognition for the right to copy. This means for 14 years after a book was published, the people owning the monopoly right had exclusive rights to copy, replicate and sell. However, immediately publishers started lobbying for an extension of the monopoly. For example, expanding the term of copyright so it was more than 14 years. The Berne Convention was for a monopoly of at least 50 years after the author's death. This was a global convention about modern copyright, and it is now the foundation for the modern copyright. This was a step up, as it went from 14 years to 50 years after the author's death. This means someone could write a book and publish it by the time they were 40. After they passed away, they would still have 50 years of copyright available. We'll now talk about the current US copyright laws. There is now a monopoly for 70 years after the author's death. If corporate ownership, it is 120 years after creation or 95 years after publication. If a corporation owns these, it is corporate ownership. These numbers show the trajectory of the expansion of monopoly rights. This is very important. An example of this would be J.R.R. Tolkien, who was the author of Lord of the Rings. They died in 1973. The Lord of the Rings books, however, will be in the public domain in 2043, meaning the books will be free of copyright. This is also the same as the Australian laws for copyright, and all countries are advised that they should follow this copyright at the moment. Now let's talk about what you can do with copyright. Public domain. Anything not under copyright is in the public domain and can be copied and remixed freely. For example, music from the 18th and 19th century is public domain. Fair use is also what you can do with copyright. While this is not a right, it is a defense against litigation. By default, you don't have the rights to use anything copyrighted. In Australia, fair dealing deals with this. This applies only for limited purposes defined by purpose and character of use, the nature of work being used, the amount of work used, and the effect of its use on the value of the original. An example of fair use would be using something for educational purposes, such as a part of a book. Now let's talk about what you cannot do in terms of copyright. Three of these are DMCA and EULA. However, today we are just going to talk about EULA, also known as End of User Agreement License, or also EULA. An example of EULA is when you first play a game, it comes up with an agreement to play. Usually this is just a whole bunch of words and usually people just skip it. At the end of the words, you have to accept or decline. What people don't really know is that they are signing a contract with the distributor of the game. It is a legally binding contract expanding control beyond standard copyright. When you buy the game, you are given permission to play the game. You do not own the game when you sign a EULA. There are some really interesting cases of EULA that show that people actually don't really read them. In some, people have signed their life away. They have signed their souls away, they have signed really silly things, and while these were just experiments, it shows that no one actually reads EULA, or End of User Agreement. Now that we have talked about this, I thought we should actually get into what copyright is, and how it has not always actually been a thing. It has existed as a phenomenon within the rise of the industrial society. Before copyright, the notion of property related only to scarce resources, for example land. Copyright really only extended to scarcity. Before copyright, anyone could freely copy, modify, or sell content created by others. Content creators had no property claims on their intellectual work. If you published a book, someone else could copy it and sell it as their own without getting into any trouble. Of course, this changed when the Statute of Queen Anne came into play in 1710.